In the quiet streets of Dnipro, a city in central Ukraine known more for its industrial skyline and calm residential districts than for chaos, something began to shift in a way that people didn't immediately understand. At first, it looked like random crime, a stolen phone here, a minor assault there, a late-night robbery that didn't quite make sense, nothing that would normally make national headlines, nothing that would suggest a pattern. But patterns always start small. What residents didn't know at the time was that several separate incidents, scattered across different neighborhoods, were slowly pointing towards something far more unsettling than ordinary street crime. Reports would later describe groups of teenagers, sometimes moving in pairs, sometimes in larger clusters, engaging in increasingly bold and violent acts. What made it more disturbing wasn't just the behavior itself, but the sense that there was no clear motive, no consistent target, and no hesitation. This wasn't organized crime in the traditional sense. There were no known gang leaders, no identifiable structure, no clear hierarchy. Instead, it was something more chaotic, something more unpredictable, and that is what made it terrifying. Because when violence doesn't follow rules, it becomes much harder to stop. To understand how things escalated, you have to understand the environment these events were unfolding in. Dnipro is one of Ukraine's major cities, a place where modern development and post-Soviet infrastructure exist side by side. Like many urban centers in the region, it has districts that vary significantly in wealth, opportunity, and stability. In some areas, life moves normally: schools, shops, families, routines. But in others, especially on the edges of economic decline, teenagers often find themselves with too much time, too little supervision, and very few structured opportunities. Social pressure, online influence, and group dynamics can quickly fill that vacuum. According to local reports and later journalistic coverage, it was within this environment that several groups of teenagers began forming loose social circles. At first, they were not considered dangerous. They were just known locally as disruptive, occasionally involved in petty theft or vandalism. The kind of behavior that usually gets dismissed as kids being kids. But something changed over time. Incidents began to shift from impulsive mischief to targeted aggression. Victims were no longer random in a purely opportunistic sense. There were reports of ambush-style assaults, coordinated intimidation, and in a few cases, extreme violence that escalated far beyond what would be expected from typical juvenile delinquency. What made it worse was the inconsistency. There was no single known leader, no confirmed ideology, no manifesto, just fragments of behavior that suggested imitation, escalation, and a growing sense of detachment from consequence. The earliest serious wave of concern began when multiple victims reported being attacked in similar ways within a short time frame. These were not connected cases at first glance. Different locations, different times, different victims. But investigators began noticing similarities in the methods described. Groups of teenagers approaching in public areas, sudden confrontations, theft followed by unnecessary violence. In some instances, victims reported that the attackers appeared almost detached, as if the act itself was more important than the outcome. As police began mapping the incidents, a disturbing overlap started to appear. Certain names kept surfacing in witness accounts, though inconsistently. Some victims described groups of 3 or 4. Others mentioned larger gatherings. But what tied them together was the behavior, impulsive, coordinated, and unusually bold for their age. Social media also played a role in amplifying the situation. Private messages, group chats, and video clips began circulating locally, though much of this content was later deleted or taken down. Authorities later suggested that some of the behavior may have been influenced by online challenges or peer-driven escalation, where reputation within the group became tied to increasingly risky actions. At least one reported incident escalated into a fatal outcome, which shifted the entire situation from local concern to national attention. Details were never fully unified across sources, but the pattern was enough to trigger deeper investigation. Law enforcement faced a major challenge: the lack of structure. There was no centralized gang leadership to dismantle, no clear chain of command. Instead, it appeared to be a fluid network of adolescents whose connections overlapped in unpredictable ways. Interviews with educators and local residents painted a fragmented picture. Some described troubled students with behavioral issues. Others described otherwise ordinary teenagers who seemed to shift dramatically when in groups. That distinction became one of the key psychological questions of the case, whether the violence was driven by individuals or by the group dynamic itself. As pressure increased, police began detaining several suspects connected to different incidents. However, even during questioning, consistency was rare. Stories conflicted. Motivations were unclear. Some claimed they were following others. Some minimized their involvement. Others refused to explain their actions altogether. What changed the direction of the investigation was not a single confession or breakthrough, but rather the realization that the violence may not have been rooted in traditional criminal intent at all. Instead, investigators and psychologists began considering a more unsettling possibility, that what was being observed was a form of escalation behavior driven by social reinforcement rather than planning or profit. In simpler terms, the acts were not always committed for gain or even revenge. In some cases, they appeared to be performed for status within a peer group, where each escalation increased reputation and hesitation was interpreted as weakness. This reframing changed everything, because it meant there was no single point of control, no leader to arrest that would dissolve the network. Instead, the behavior itself was being reproduced across multiple small groups independently. In one particularly disturbing analysis shared by local media, experts suggested that the environment created a feedback loop. Attention, fear, and notoriety all reinforced further actions. Even rumors about the groups contributed to their perceived power, regardless of accuracy. At this stage, the situation stopped being viewed purely as criminal and started being treated as a social and psychological phenomenon. After the wave of incidents in Dnipro began to gain wider attention, law enforcement moved quickly to identify and detain several individuals connected to the attacks. What started as scattered reports from different neighborhoods eventually led to multiple arrests tied to separate but similar cases. Most of the suspects were teenagers, and because of that, the legal process became significantly more complicated. Instead of a single unified case, authorities were forced to treat each incident individually, building separate files based on witness testimony, digital evidence, and partial confessions. According to reports from local authorities, several of the involved individuals were placed into pretrial detention while investigations continued. In serious cases involving severe injury or death, charges escalated to attempted murder or aggravated assault, which carry long-term prison sentences under Ukrainian law. What happened next became the part most people were asking about. Where are they now? As of the latest publicly available updates, most of the identified suspects remain either in detention or under ongoing trial proceedings. Because many of them are minors, parts of the legal process are not fully disclosed to the public, and identities are often restricted by law. Some cases are still unresolved, meaning final sentencing has not yet been issued. Others have already moved into court stages where psychologists, investigators, and juvenile court systems are determining responsibility and intent. In short, there is no simple ending. No clear they are free or they are gone. Instead, the situation is still legally active in multiple layers of the justice system. For the community, however, the perception is different. Even though the immediate wave of violence has decreased, the names and events remain part of local memory, especially because the case never had one single defining resolution, but is a series of events that slowly escalated and then fragmented into legal processes that are still ongoing. Some of those involved are currently in detention. Others are still awaiting final court decisions, and in several parts of the case, the full truth is still being processed through the justice system. That uncertainty is exactly what makes this case stick in people's minds. There was no mastermind, no single moment of collapse. Just a gradual build-up of behavior, group influence, and escalation that eventually crossed a line. And even now, the final chapter has not fully been written. Thank you very much for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, leave me a comment. I would really appreciate a like and a subscription. Take care.